Hey guys, welcome back to new video, and in this video we're gonna start our journey with RxJava. Now RxJava is not very popular right now because right now Kotlin coroutine is very famous, and when you start your new project in Android development you surely use Kotlin coroutine. But back in the year 2015 or 2014 it is not the case. We have RxJava, and RxJava is the only approach that we can use to do reactive programming. So if you are working at any MNC company or you have any previous project or very old project, surely they were using RxJava because RxJava is very common at that time. And if you want to migrate your RxJava code to Kotlin coroutine or want to work with RxJava, then you should know the basics of RxJava. So this playlist will cover everything regarding the RxJava that you should know in order to work with the previous project or the legacy code. So let's get started with our video. What is RxJava? Well, RxJava is a very easy way to do reactive programming, and RxJava will only have two things: observable and observer. Observable will eventually act as a publisher which publish data, and observer will observe the data and react it accordingly. So let's start our journey with RxJava. So first thing first, you should go to my GitHub repo, download the initial project and open up into your Android Studio. This will contain all of the basic setup. So basic setup means the dependencies. So when you open the build.kts file, I have added all the dependencies and I will use this dependency throughout my playlist. So we have here Rx support, as you can see in here. So we have rxandroid, we have RxJava, and also we have retrofit dependency, room dependency that we'll use later in this playlist. Okay, so open up your main activity and let's start our journey with a very simple example. So as I told you, in RxJava we have two things: we have observable and observer. So I'm going to create a main function in here, and first I want to create a publisher or observable. So I'm going to call this observable. You can create observable using observable dot create, and I'm going to use here create that has a trailing lambda. In this you can pass the type. So I want to emit data which is a type of string, that's why I'm using here string, and in this trailing lambda you are receiving the emitter. So I'm going to rename it from it to emitter, and now it's time to use it. So use emitter dot. As you can see, we are having here a few options. We have on error, we have on next, we have on complete. So on next is used when you want to emit some data from this observable. Then we have on error. So if you encounter an error, you can expose that error or emit that error using on error method. Next we have on complete. So if your observable or your task is complete, you can simply use here on complete and emit the on complete so that your observer will know that your task is complete. Okay, so I want to emit here few information. So I'm using here on next, and I want to emit here string naming first. Similarly, I want to emit one more string naming second. Okay, so we have an observable. Now it's time to observe these changes. So for that we'll create an observer. Use here object observer. Make sure this observer is coming from RxJava 3 core. Type of this thing is string because as you can see our observable emit string, that's why. Open a pair of parentheses, and in this we have few functions. So simply override it. Press Ctrl I and enter. So we have here on subscribe, on next, on error and on complete. So if you want to observe the changes of your observable, on that case you have to subscribe your observer to this observable, then only you are able to observe the changes. So for that, at the bottom I'm using here observable, and in this we have a method naming subscribe, and in this subscribe you can pass your observer, and that's it. So when you emit here using on next any values, it will trigger on next. So I'm gonna use here print ln and print the value. If we encounter any error, again I'm gonna use here print ln, and I'm gonna use here message error, and after that the actual message which is e. And when our emitter will trigger on complete method, then we'll receive this event. So I'm gonna use here print ln, and I'm gonna print complete. Similarly on subscribe, I'm gonna use println and use here subscribe. Alright, so now I'm going to execute my main function. As you can see, so when we attach this observer to this observable, subscribe block will trigger. So we have subscribe, and after that we'll emitting here first and second. So it will eventually trigger this on next, and on next will print the first value and this second value. Now what will happen if I encounter any error? So emitter dot on error, and let's say I want to pass here throwable that has this is error message. Okay, so now when I execute it, as you can see, we have subscribe, we have first, second, and lastly the error. Now I want to emit one more value, which is 3, and execute it. We are not getting 3 because before that we are receiving the error message. Okay, now just for time being, remove this error, and lastly I'm gonna use here on complete. And when you execute it, as you can see, we have first received the subscribe event, then first, second, third, and lastly on complete. Okay, so by using this you can actually emit values from your observable and observe the changes using your observer. Now what will happen if I just uncomment this error and execute it? Because we are receiving the error, on next 3 and on complete will never trigger. Now is there any way to resume our emission from here when we receive any kind of error? Yes, it is possible, and we can do this thing by using on error resume next. So if you want to use any kind of backup observable when we encounter any error, then you can use on error resume next. So for that, because I want a backup observable in here, I'm going to create here a backup observable. So observable, just I'm gonna say this error. So this is my backup observable, so I'm gonna use this backup observable. So what will happen when we receive an error, it will call this block. Because this block has an backup observable, will emit these values, and after that it will continue their emission. So when you execute it, now this time we are not receiving this message, this is error message, because when we encounter this error, it will eventually come to this block, and this block has a backup observable. So backup observable has an observable that emit error, and this is something which is receiving in here. So error, and after that we'll receive the complete. But here you can notice we are not receiving this 3, because when you encounter on error, it will start using the backup observable, and after that it will trigger only the on complete. It will never emit the values that we are having within this on error and on complete. So let me show you by using emitter on next, and this time I want to, let's say, emit 5. So when you execute it, you are not going to see these two emissions. So we are emitting first, second, and when we encounter the error, it comes in here, it uses the backup observable, and after that it will complete our emission. So on error resume next is used when you want to continue your emissions during an error. So we saw how to use on error resume next. Now we have few more operators, do on each. So this will trigger every time when you emit any new values. So I'm using here println, and I'm going to call this on each, and just after that I'm showing the value. So it dot value, and when you execute it, so subscribe on each first, and after that we'll receive this first in our on next observer. Then we have on each second, we'll receive this second, on each null, because we are getting the error. That's why we are getting here null value. Similarly, we have do on error. So if you want to do something when you receive error, you can do that thing within this lambda. We have do finally. So if you want to execute some task at the end of your emissions, you can do that thing very easily by using do finally. So I'm using here println and call this finally. So when you execute it, As you can see, this finally block will trigger no matter whether you are receiving an error or anything else. It will surely trigger do finally. It's like try catch finally, just we have in our Kotlin try catch finally. So if you want to execute something at the end of your try catch, you can use finally, and finally block must trigger every time. It doesn't matter whether you are catching any error or not, it will surely trigger the finally block. Similarly, it goes in here. Alright, so that's it for the part first. This is a very basic things that you should know about RxJava, observable and observer. In the next video we will discuss about the subject family of RxJava. Till that, goodbye.